All my life, I've always tried to avoid becoming ensnared by mind traps that exist for the human being. It's a very brave thing to do, as far as I'm concerned, to be born on the earth. So, yeah, I've struggled with various paradoxes and traps that are kind of intrinsic to one's existence as a flesh and blood being.
What kind of traps?
Oh, right and wrong, good and bad, all kinds of duality, success and failure.
Do you think that we can avoid duality in our experience, in our lives?
No, I don't think it can be avoided, but I think it can be accepted on a level that changes the whole picture. I think acceptance of the duality can, in a way, resolve it.
You are a street poet. How did you come to create poetry upon request for people in the street of New York?
Well, I came to it mostly out of desperation, as well as I love to improvise in all forms all the time. So I was desperate and I loved to improvise, and I had a harmonica at the time that I traded my roommate for a typewriter with. So I wound up with this typewriter, which I had not used since I was a little kid. I grew up typing on my mother's typewriter, but now I had one of my own, and I just I had this street performance idea from my friend William, who does the same thing in Olympia, Washington. So that gave me the initial spark, and I tried it, and it seemed to work, and I've been doing it for about 10 years.
What does it really change from writing with a laptop?
Well, I have to go a little bit slower because the typewriter is not going to accommodate such a fast typing speed or speed of thought. The computer keyboard is much more available for very, very fast action. So on a computer, I can go extremely fast, almost as fast as I can think. Not quite, but it's closer. On the typewriter, I have to slow down a bit, and I have to leave room for my thoughts to come along and just go at a generally meandering pace. So I appreciate that. And the touch is very satisfying. I prefer the feeling of typing on a typewriter. I often make the analogy that it's like an acoustic piano versus a keyboard. You know, a keyboard usually doesn't have a heavy touch. It's very light, and you can go very fast on a keyboard, but it doesn't have the same depth of touch.
Tell me about the sound.
Yeah, well, they certainly make you feel like you're doing something because um, I'm activating this machine, and this machine is filling my ears with noises, and feel it's filling my sense of touch with a sense of action, and yeah, it makes me think that something's going on. Whereas on a computer, sometimes I feel like, oh, nothing's happening. I'm getting so little sensory information except through my eyes, and even that is very transient. You know, a screen doesn't quite appear to be a real thing. It looks like a projection of something.
How is it possible to create poetry upon request?
Well, it takes a lot of practice, is the first thing. There are a few elements to it. One of the elements I often talk about is it's in a spirit of conversation. So we're always improvising words when we're in conversation, and we don't think about it too much. We just think about what the other person has said and how we feel and what we might want to say, and we just say it. And it's a process that we rarely examine because it's considered so ordinary, and everybody in every culture does it. So that's kind of one of the baseline skills being used. I pride myself on being a conversationalist as well as a poet, so poetry upon request is a way for me to bring those skill sets together, use empathetic listening, and just use a sort of general engagement, emotional engagement, person to person to fuel my creative work. And then the other aspects are, just practicing poetry a lot, practicing writing a lot, getting into a space where I can sustain my own bursts of language without necessarily having external prompts or having a need to make conversation at the moment. Just allowing myself a very free flow of language. I'm constantly writing, and that is necessary, I feel. I don't think I could do poetry upon request if I didn't have a daily constant writing practice, because it all flows together. Yeah. And then another thing that goes into being a good conversationalist is being able to use nonverbal language and read body language and read emotional language, even psychic language at times. So all of those things play into it. I'm always also practicing reading people. I'm practicing reading myself. I do a lot of introspection as well as observing others in a dedicated way, like where I just set aside time for meditation, where I just observe myself, and I also make time just to people watch, where I just observe others. And so those practices of observation are also quite important. Yeah, and it's probably worth mentioning I grew up in a very deranged household with very mentally ill caregiver. So in order to get my basic needs met, I had to kind of skirt around the direct routes and be very indirect about things. So that kind of gave me an education in what the boundaries around direct language are.
What is the first thing you're looking at when somebody come to you to get a poem from you?
First, I just try to judge if they're serious. I mean, some people just want to pass by and make a comment, and that's fine. Or some people just say, write something, and they walk off. So, first I just make sure they're actually stopping and giving me their full attention. That's the first thing I look for. And then I just try to get a sense of what their experience is. That's my primary motivation. Everybody approaches that in different ways. Some people are more verbal than others. But I encourage people to be as vulnerable as they can and share some aspect of their current experience that they might not share with everybody, or something about how they're really feeling on the inside. Occasionally it's more easy to open up to a stranger than it is to someone you know, so I try to take advantage of that. That's generally what I'm looking for. I'm looking for people's inner truth at the present moment.
How do you ask that?
Well, I try to get a conversation going, and the truth kind of comes out. Sometimes it's implied, sometimes it's direct, but I just try to pick up on whatever truth the people are giving to me in ordinary conversation. So I don't have a special secret, I don't have magic words to make people open up, but I just keep myself in an open space, in a space of compassion and non-judgment, and people feel that on an emotional level. So when I'm keeping that space, I don't have to use any words. People just know that I'm a safe person to open up to.
How do they ask their questions to you?
It's quite a wide range. Some people just step up and say, I want a poem, and take it from there. Other people are just curious, like, what are you doing? Like, what is this? So then I have to narrate a little bit about what I'm doing. Those are the two probably most common. Sometimes people have an occasion. This is usually what people think I do at first glance, like, oh, write something for my girlfriend's anniversary, or write something for my friend's birthday, occasional poems, which are fine. I like occasions and poems, so putting those things together is fine. But yeah, I'm usually going for people's individual experiences, writing a poem for the person in front of me. If I'm writing for someone else, I try to feel into their relationship as much as I can, because that also gives me information about the person who's absent.
Is it necessary for you to write at the typewriter to create your poems, or is it possible for you to create it from scratch without the typewriter?
The typewriter is not necessary, but it does give people a sense of coming away with something tangible, a souvenir, something they can hold. And it makes a nice gift, a tangible gift to give someone. It can go in a card, it can, go in a frame, be on the wall. A spoken poem is lost unless it's remembered or recorded or something. So that's why I prefer a typewriter.
This is a recorded interview. Do you want to make a short poem?
Sure. Okay. Predestination and the digits fly southward, geese flocking home to Mexico or Canada, depending on the wheel. Each inner frame a different setting for a different landscape, a time perhaps forgotten for a few generations, then remembered loudly in a great ejaculation of sustenance. I haven't yet found the keys to these endeavors, but I do fly as the geese do, northward and southward along magnetic lines that only I can sense at times. I create the music which I must feel, to engage as I do in circular strumming. There are times I imagine petals falling from a winded tree and all the creatures underneath squabbling with one another for the leavings. And it's an amusing thing, like chalk used to be, and sometimes still is, if found in adult deposits, wired home to families. I've long studied their exhibitions, hoping for a glob of paint to come off, but they're very good at restoration these days. And I release my shortcomings to the intrinsic bonus applied upon birth.
Thank you, Alan. Is it easy to add some more words?
It's always easy to add more words. Something I try to sense is the time window that's open or closed. So I can write indefinitely or speak indefinitely, but we live in time and space, and people have places to go and things to do. And there also comes a moment at which I've made my point, if there is a point to be made. So at that point, I usually stop. The words could continue indefinitely, but then it would become less of a singular event that people might identify as a poem and more of something that people would identify as a process or as a field, or this is how I think about it anyway. So I think people like the sense of having an individuated moment, a start and an end that's perceived. So I like to honor that as much as possible. And it also helps me do a little more with the time than might otherwise be done with it. Because, in the same amount of time, it would be, I think, difficult to find the same amount of meaning. I would find it difficult. So I think that's one of the great uses of art. It's a lot of meaning in a very condensed time.
Do you feel inspired to be able to create your poems?
Inspiration is another thing that I view as a constant process. I think it's mostly for convenience that we talk about being inspired for a particular act or a particular work or, a particular undertaking. I think inspiration, for me, it's a much more constant state. It's a much more solid field. It's a flow that I'm in. And yeah, sometimes I'm inspired to write something and I write something. Sometimes I'm inspired to do something else and I do something else. I guess I aspire to have a non-dualistic relationship with inspiration or boredom, whatever that duality is between inspiration or frustration. I like to feel that, that I'm free of that duality. Perhaps it's not true, but it's a really nice illusion for me.
What do you mean?
Well, I like to feel that, for instance, I'm always inspired.
So you're not experiencing duality?
Yeah, I'm not experiencing any lack of inspiration. My regular state is inspiration, yeah.
What does it mean to be constantly inspired?
It's a great degree of enthusiasm. It's a great degree of hopefulness. When you're creating something, even if you're, horrendously depressed or going through the worst time of your life, when you're actively creating something, you have to be in a hopeful stance because anything else stops the process. If you're like, oh, this isn't good enough, or, I'm not inspired right now. If you say these things, then the process stops. So to engage with the process, you have to display a manifest enthusiasm and a hopefulness and a positivity. So maybe it's not about transcending duality as much as it is maintaining positivity. I mean, everyone goes in and out of these moments where they feel happier or less happy. Yeah, for me, it's all very much related. Like my personal happiness and also my success as an artist are very related. It's not that way for everyone. Some people are happy when they create and they're sad other times, which is fine. But yeah, I aspire to keep a continuous stream of positivity. This all might be a little abstract for somebody who doesn't understand inspiration, but I'm trying.
Do you know why people come and ask you what they want to express?
Not everyone has a great facility with language. Not everyone understands their own inspiration and their own creative process and how it works. In our culture, it's discouraged, to say the least, to be in a constantly inspired state. It's discouraged to learn about your own creativity. it's more encouraged to follow somebody else's mandates and somebody else's creations and see where you fit into a system that you did not create. And there's validity to that. I mean, it's a valid path, and for some people it works. But I think all of us need some relationship with our inner creativity and our inner powers of manifestation. We're not all as intimate with those powers as we would like to be. So a lot of people who come up to me on the street are saying, "Oh, I'm not that creative," or statements to that effect. So they're looking to me to display my creativity and hopefully also help them get in touch with their creativity that they perceive as distant. One of the best kinds of feedback that I ever get is when I have someone writing to me and saying, "Oh, you got me back into writing, and I just wrote some things, and it's been so long since I wrote, and I really enjoyed it." That's really good. That's in my book, a great compliment, that I've stimulated someone else's process, that I've reminded them of something that they want to engage with. That's the best kind of feedback for me. There are many, many other kinds of feedback. I mean, people laugh or cry or have all kinds of reactions. Sometimes they just look confused. And it's all great. It's all great as long as there's movement. The point for me is to inspire movement. And sometimes people feel stuck or feel like they aren't moving. We're always moving, but we don't always perceive that we're moving. And I think also movement has a lot to do with this quality of hopefulness that I'm talking about. Because if we feel that we're moving and changing and growing, then we're in a state of inspiration.
You mean we are constantly transforming ourselves? That's what you mean about movement?
Basically, yes. We're transforming ourselves freshly in every instant. We're becoming a new person, yeah. It's probably fair to say that not every poet shares that goal. There are all kinds of reasons to write poetry, but that's definitely one of my primary reasons.
How long does it take to have a poem from you in the street?
The poem usually doesn't take that long. I guess I just did one for your recording. It would be a pretty similar amount of time if I were to write it out on the typewriter. And then when I read it, you wouldn't have such long pauses because the pauses would have been in my process of typing. But it would probably take a similar amount of time. I'm pretty synchronized in terms of my inner process and my outer process. So my thoughts are more or less coming at the same speed that I think them.
You're talking about movement, and you ask people to stop to talk to you.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. I never thought about that. The sort of movement I'm looking for is much more subtle. It's not like walking down the street movement. It's more spiritual movement, I guess, that I'm talking about. Spiritual movement being the felt sense that one is changing in the present moment, the felt sense that one's reality is expanding in the present moment. It's really quite a buzz when you have that feeling. I mean, a lot of people take drugs or do, rather reckless things to try to get that feeling, the thrill of being alive in the present, the thrill of having your field of awareness expand. Yeah, and just being joyfully in love with the present. I guess, movement towards that state or within that state is what I'm seeking.
Did you ever experience that the poem you've written for someone is not good?
I don't experience that in recent memory. When I was starting out, I used to experience that. But then I consistently noticed that, a poem that I hated, I would give to someone and they would just light up and they would love it. So that kind of changed my opinion about things. And it made me much more accepting of my own writing. I'm much more now in the direction of accepting everything that I write as opposed to accepting some things and rejecting other things. So I'm pretty happy now with everything I write.
As a street poet, what strikes you the most in New York streets?
I do like that irony, that I'm doing something that's so quiet and so subtle and so sweet smelling, you could say, in such a dirty and noisy, busy environment. Yeah, I savor that contrast.
You don't want to do ghostwriting. Does it mean that you want to sign your work?
I do. I feel very proprietary about my poems. Yeah, I don't know. It gives me a personal sense of satisfaction to sign something and have these poems that I consider beautiful and many other people consider beautiful. To have my personal name attached to them is a great honor.
And at the same time, coming back to your creative process, everything comes from inspiration. So how is it possible to sign with your name for something that comes from a mysterious part?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, I'm the vessel for the inspiration. I'm the channel, so it's good to know who the channel is. And if somebody wants similar kinds of inspiration, they can look for the same channel. They can tune into that channel and be inspired. So that's probably the reason.
Did you learn something essential from your street poetry for your personal life?
Yes. I learned to speak through typing poetry in a very literal sense. I grew up in a household where I was silenced very violently and very often. So I barely used my voice until I was a young adult, basically. I literally would speak in sentence fragments or in words that I made up because I was just so terrified of being silenced. So coming of age as a young adult, it's around the same time that I started this profession that I have now. So I was kind of learning to speak aloud and learning to be confident speaking aloud at the same time as I was learning how to write poems upon request. So, yeah, it's very much interlinked with my personal life and my personal development, the development of my own relationships. It's helped me create a higher and higher standard for what I accept and reject in my personal life, definitely. It's been very healing for me.
And now, do you like silence?
I love silence, yeah. All words come from silence. Silence is often some of the greatest inspiration there is. And I think if we understood this more as a culture, a lot of people would be a lot more sensitive, a lot more woken up to nature and to reality itself. You know, we don't honor silence very much as a culture, but I think there's a lot of room for us to grow in that regard.
I'm going to leave the space, keep the microphone, and add whatever you want to the interview.
That's a great idea. You are a wondrous being, created of stars. You shine with the luminosity of infinite galaxies. This creation is your creation. You made it. Enjoy what it is. Enjoy what you made. You are one of the creators of this world and of these words that I'm saying, even. So do honor yourself as a channel and as a vessel and as a being. Whatever I'm channeling, you can channel too. However expansive I'm sounding, you too can sound that expansive. Never doubt yourself, because you're capable of infinite greatness in infinite ways. You're created of the same things that the planets are created out of, that bulldozers are created out of, that everything is created out of. And there are probably ways to create things that are better than anything you could imagine. So I encourage you to look for those ways. I think that's what I have to say.